Done.
Love that. That was great.
There we go. Good transition.
Hi. See a couple people. See participants numbers going up down here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our False Dichotomies webinar. I'm going to let people continue to sign in for a couple of moments, but in the meantime, if you don't mind dropping your name in the chat and where you're tuning in from, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Tuning in from Ireland, very cool. Cold, okay. It's cold over here in New York too. It finally got to the point where
Yeah.
you have to wear layers, which is nice. I have to say this is my favorite part, seeing where everyone is from, because I don't always expect people to be from all over the country, and it's always people from all corners of the world, so it's very cool. Thank you, Greta. Someone let that go for another minute or so. And if you're just tuning in, everyone is dropping their names and the city or where they're tuning in from in the chat. Hi, Richard. Glad you can make it. Oakland. All right. Well, everyone else keeps putting their name and where they're from, where they're tuning in from in the chat. I'm going to get started with today's webinar. My name is Emil Sequiros. I'm the Senior Manager of Storytelling and Content Strategy here at Common Justice. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Welcome to our final False Dichotomies webinar of the year. And thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us. I know it's not always easy to tune into a webinar in the middle of the workday, but I really, really appreciate you all being here. Yeah, like I said, if you're just tuning in, I'm gonna ask everyone to drop their name and where they're from in the chat or where they're tuning in from. And we know that this week is a federal holiday. There's a federal holiday coming up this week, Thanksgiving. But we want to acknowledge the truth behind this holiday today and why, for Indigenous people of the United States, this Thursday is not a day to give thanks at all, but is known as a national day of mourning. Contrary to what most of us were told growing through the US education system, if you went through the US education system, Thanksgiving was not a peaceful dinner between pilgrims and Indigenous people. The first Thanksgiving dinner was a celebration of the massacre of 700 Pequot men, women, and children. And it was established as a day to give thanks to God for eliminating these 700 people from the earth. If this week is not a week of celebration for you, it also happens to be Restorative Justice Week, which is what we do here at Common Justice. For those of you who may not already be familiar with our work, we operate the first alternative to incarceration and victim services program in the United States that focuses on violent felonies in adult courts. Nationally, we leverage the lessons from our direct service to transform the justice system. Excuse me, my dog is barking in the background. Through partnerships, advocacy, and elevating. Excuse me one second. My apologies, everyone. So yes, nationally, we leverage the lessons from our direct service to transform the justice system through partnerships, advocacy, and elevating the experience and power of those most impacted. Rigorous and hopeful, we build practical strategies to hold people accountable for harm, break cycles of violence, and secure safety, healing, and justice for survivors in their communities. Throughout the webinar, you're going to hear a couple words that you may not be familiar with: harmed party and responsible party. These are terms that we use at our organization to refer to survivors of violence and those who have harmed them. We use these terms because they value and honor the humanity of each person, regardless of the roles they played in coming to our program. If you have any questions you'd like to ask any of the panelists, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists for today. Anna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do here at Common Justice and what your preferred pronouns are?
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Ana Vasquez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Senior Manager of Development at Common Justice. So I'm part of a team that works to create the resources that we need to keep expanding and growing this work. In my personal life, I like doing community art projects because I like connecting people to something that they're passionate about and connecting that to something bigger.
Thank you. RJ, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your preferred pronouns?
Sure. My name's RJ Makani. I use he and they pronouns. I've been involved in transformative and restorative justice-based work for about the past 15 years. And for the past 5 years, I've also gotten the chance to work with our responsible parties at Common Justice.
Thank you. Em, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is M. Pianka. I'm a trauma support manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been with Common Justice since August 2020. In my role, I work with our harmed parties who are all survivors of violence, and I accompany them through their healing and through their lives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So one of the biggest struggles and the main point of this webinar is to kind of discuss as a team with our audience what some of the struggles that we faced through the pandemic. Obviously, for many of us and for us as an organization, the COVID-19 pandemic was one of the biggest struggles that we've ever faced. So I kind of wanted to open up this time to have everyone talk all about like the struggles that they faced in particular in their work. And I'd like to start off with Anna. What were some of the struggles that you faced in your work during the pandemic?
Nice, easy question. So if we travel back in time to the week of March 13, 2020, in New York City, that was the week when people had to start transitioning into working remotely. So that was a challenge at the time because we basically had to figure out how to transition our operation into remote work ASAP. So we had to figure out a lot as we went to go, rolling with the punches, not a lot of time to think of something. And we also had to make sure that our staff was equipped to be able to work from home, which, you know, we do direct service. So that's something different. And one of the other challenges that came up was that we had to revise our budget for the year because we had to account for creating all these new systems that we needed to adapt to our new reality.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie. They should be on now. RJ, do you mind telling us a little bit about some of the struggles that you face in your work through the pandemic?
Sure. So at Common Justice, you know, our work with responsible parties, right, people who have caused harm, and it's that harm that has led them to be a part of our program. You know, typically a participant is with us for 12 to 15 months, and it's very intensive engagement. And a big part of it is relationship building. And that would happen through, at the beginning, it's 5 days a week in person, one-on-one, and then also a group where all the participants could come together. And so obviously, as Anna mentioned, come March 2020, all of that had to move to the phone, move to Zoom. And there's just really a palpable difference in the kinds of connection that we could form over those mediums. Definitely something that, I hope we can improve on over time, but we've seen such a marked difference and improvement since we've been able to start working face-to-face again. Another big piece of our work is supporting our responsible parties in achieving greater material stability in their lives, because we know it's from that place of stability that then they're able to take accountability for the harm that they've caused, that they're able to start to transform their own lives in ways that may prevent them from ever harming someone again. And the pandemic and the ensuing lockdown just caused many of our participants' material lives to crumble.
And as a trauma support manager, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the particular challenges that you faced were in dealing with the harmed parties through the pandemic?
Absolutely. Many of trauma support's clients already faced economic marginalization. So with the pandemic, what was already there was zoomed in on 100 times as clients had reduced work hours or lost work or had to care for children at home. And although I came into my role while the pandemic was happening, but it was so clear to me that the focus of my department's work had shifted to kind of putting out these fires and just making sure people had what they needed to survive and stay safe. And, I would just say it added such a significant and complex layer to the traumas many of our clients have faced or are facing on an ongoing basis. And that the pandemic is a massive global trauma that exacerbated systemic inequities, such as access to material resources. And if you're already in survival mode from having survived violence and then having to be in survival mode during a pandemic to meet your daily needs, it just brings up a lot and puts enormous stress on the nervous system. The least trauma support could do was to bring ease and to continue to bring ease as much as possible through supporting some of these material needs so our folks could just breathe a little easier.
And what were some of the issues that became glaringly obvious to you when the pandemic was in full swing about what it would take for us to actually support our harmed parties during this time?
Honestly, what was most obvious to me was that we needed monetary resources in order to support these material needs. There are tons of services in New York City, but for many reasons, a lot of our clients are either not eligible for those services due to immigration status, for example, or due to being crime survivors, don't feel safe walking to the nearest food pantry or whatnot. So, we were able, as an organization, to provide some of that direct material relief, like supporting gift cards to Key Food and other grocery stores, for example. We spent almost $185,000 on that. And every single client I had who was part of that program spoke just all the time to what a difference it made in their ability to have a little bit less stress in their lives and be able to rest and to also process some of the trauma that brought them to common justice in the first place, besides the pandemic.
RJ and Anna, I don't know if you guys have an answer for this question, but what were some of the issues that became obvious to you and how you would have to shift your work in order to support our participants?
Just briefly, we're an alternative to incarceration, and I think in some people's minds that's associated with sort of being soft on crime. But accountability is actually incredibly difficult, and you can think in your own life, like times you maybe needed to be accountable for something or tried to be accountable, to get a sense of just how hard it is to take accountability, especially when the harm is great. So for our responsible party participants, to do that kind of hard work, and to also think about other kinds of change they're going to make in their lives, at a time when their relationship with us was remote, and they're by and large in crisis and surrounded by people in crisis. It took something that was already hard and made it extremely hard. And so it's a real credit to our participants that we're able to make it through that time.
Thank you. I'm gonna skip over to this next question. And this question is for you, Anna. Can you tell us a little bit about the fundraising campaign that we are currently running, and how does it differ from other fundraising efforts that we've done in the past?
Absolutely. So we just launched our fall campaign, Roots of Resilience. You could see it on our Common Justice website. This is a campaign when aiming to increase unrestricted funds that we can use towards these pandemic interventions. Because one of the challenges that we face as a nonprofit, like a lot of nonprofits like struggle with this, is that when you build your budget with private funds, that restricts to how you can use the money. So as RJ and M have emphasized, a lot of our participants come from underfunded communities, which are the ones that were most severely impacted by COVID. So we want to create the space to be able to provide them the support that they need to get through this moment. And another thing that I want to highlight about this campaign is that it was put together with the thought and passion of people who work with our participants, and want to make sure that we can provide them with what they need to get through this moment.
One of the questions that we often get asked as an organization, and it's the theme of this whole webinar, is what does healing equity mean? So for once and for all, we're going to answer that today. What does healing equity mean to you, and what are some of the ways that you foster healing equity through the work that you do here at Common Justice? And I'll start with you, Anna.
Yeah, so for me, healing equity means for people to have agency over their healing journey. And I'll add that in a society that is increasingly stratified, that means having the resources, support, and stability to be able to maintain that agency.
RJ, do you mind taking a stab at that one?
Sure. I think I want to say a few things about healing equity and healing and responsible parties throughout the course of this webinar. But I think, the thing I want to share now is just that taking accountability. And what I mean by that is, acknowledging the impact that someone's caused someone else, acknowledging the harm, trying to take all the actions possible to make what happened as right as possible, knowing that we can't make things right, and really changing oneself. Not only is that work hard, and not only can it be of benefit to, potentially be of benefit to the harmed party's healing process, but for most of us, when we cause harm to others, we're also burdened with shame. And what we know is that shame is a driver of violence. So one piece of healing equity, I think, as we embody it, as we do the work, is actually supporting folks who have caused harm to be accountable, and through that process, heal some of the shame that came along with causing harm to someone else. And I see that as part of healing equity.
Thank you. What does healing equity mean to you?
For me, I think about choice, because trauma takes away choice, and systemic oppression and inequity takes away a lot of choices. In my work with my clients and in the trauma support department in general, we strive to create a container where we can honor our clients' autonomy and the choices they have access to. For me, I think a lot about using my privilege, especially as a white person, to advocate for my clients to find ways to expand the choices and resources they have access to in any way possible, like supporting them with applications for services or letting a landlord know that I know how they're treating their tenant. Something that we were able to do in 2020 was actually offer direct relief payments, for example. So if a client, flagged or notified us that they were unable to meet their basic needs and financial stress was becoming an extremely significant stressor for them, we were able just to give them a small chunk of money, not a significant chunk of money, maybe still small in the grand scheme of things, for them to spend on whatever they need. And for me, that's healing equity, right? Trusting that clients know what they need. We don't need to figure that out for them. We can trust them. We can continue to build a relationship with them, and really just lifting that up in every single way possible.
Thank you. And if anyone in the audience has any questions about healing equity or anything else that we've mentioned so far, please feel free to drop the question in the Q&A box. And this next question is for RJ specifically. You've been with Common Justice, I think, longer than most of us here. And you've been here as an intervention manager working directly with our responsible parties. What are some of the false dichotomies that exist between responsible parties and harm parties that you wish to dispel in your work?
It's a great question. I mean, I think the response most relevant to this particular setting is one that I hope a lot of the folks in attendance would agree with, which is a huge one. And it's the notion that responsible parties are people that cause harm, and harmed parties are people that have been survivors of that harm or victims of that harm, are two completely separate groups. That this notion that we live in a world of good people and bad people. It's particularly important in our context, in a context of a society built on white supremacy. And so it's also actually appropriate that we're talking about it right now, because what it means is that then Black and brown folks get coded as people who've caused harm, and white folks get coded as harmed parties. And then those ideas shape how the quote unquote criminal justice system is built, and they shape how victim services gets built, and who victim services are built for. So these are the sort of outcomes that come from this. And so I think if we can find a way past that false dichotomy and really recognize, and I see this every day in my work, that the responsible parties I work with are also harmed parties, both of chronic conditions that are harmful, as well as acute moments of violence in their lives that have shaped them and even shaped their childhood. And that those things also need to be tended to, right? Those are also sites of healing that, if they're tended to, can actually lead us towards, I think, an actually more peaceful society. And so in the meantime, what we have now is we have gratuitous impunity, which I think the recent, I think we've recently seen this in Wisconsin, is kind of one end of the spectrum. And then excessive punishment, which is just how people are treated if they break a law and they happen to be Black, brown, poor, immigrant. In the meantime, we'll have these two ends of the spectrum that are both incredibly violent and perpetuate violence.
Now, RJ, we have a question for you in the chat from Sarah. I'm not sure if you can see it. Sarah Shord. Let me know if I'm butchering your last name. She wants to know, they want to know how we get access to the responsible party. Does the Defense Council engage with us, or does our work with restorative justice take place during the plea negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, we're a post-plea organization. And It requires the consent of the harmed party, as well as the DA's office. And of course, it requires the consent of the responsible party. We often meet multiple times to decide whether this is an appropriate course of action.
Thank you. And I hope that answers your question, Sarah. What do you wish that people understood? And this question is for everyone on the panel. What do you wish that people understood about violence in our communities and what it takes to reduce it? How does the solution that you have differ from the more prisons and more police solution that we've been led to believe in as a country? And I'll pass this off to Anna first.
Yeah, for me, violence should be approached as a health crisis in the sense that you're not just looking at the symptoms, you're also looking at the causes. I think addressing violence should be rooted in community and in understanding that there's not like a one size fits all approach, and it's something that can be and must be prevented.
All right, RJ, do you have a response to that?
I do. I also just have sirens in the back.
All right, I'll pass it to Em for now.
Yeah. You know, as a person of faith, I wish people understood that everyone has inherent worth and dignity and that it's possible to respect that. I also wish people understood how much direct material support, like mutual aid, for example, creates healthier and safer communities. You know, like people talk about community violence as a public health issue. And I also think that our economic system and the systems of oppressions it both roots itself in and then upholds is a public health issue.
All right, RJ, is it peaceful enough for you to answer?
It is, it is. I think that the notion that punishment is the sort of obvious response to violence is so deeply built into our culture. You know, if you were to turn on TV, go watch a movie, have a casual conversation with most folks, be in a child's classroom, have an infraction take place at your workplace, any of those settings, the idea that punishment is the obvious response to harm or to breaking a law is so built in. And I think that as long as we rely on punishment as a response to violence, we will continue to live in a very violent society. And similarly, as long as we continue to deny the history of our country and the root causes of a lot of the violence that continues to this day, as long as we live in this space of punishment and denial, we will continue to have the very violent society we have. And I think in their place, we should try at least, we should attempt, and I think it offers us some possibility if we pursue, instead of punishment, authentic accountability. And instead of denial, of course, memory and healing and reparations. I think those are paths that are worthy of a great push from many of us and offer us the possibility of an alternative future.
And if you could explain what authentic accountability, what it looks like, what it means to us at Common Justice versus the accountability that the criminal legal system produces.
Sure. I think at its core, accountability is a really active process. And that's one of the things that distinguishes it from punishment, which is typically very passive. I've caused harm, and so now I'm going to be punished. Something will be done to me. And so I think the first thing to understand about accountability, as far as we see it, is that it's a very active process and actually is often a much more difficult thing to do. It's very simple and mindless to be told to sit in the corner or sit in a cell, to be hit or to be hurt. for doing something, it's a lot more difficult to have to actually contemplate and face the person or the people that were harmed, to contemplate your role in it, to have to name the things that you did, to have to negotiate and figure out what can I do now to do those things. And then to look into oneself and think, what is in my history that needs to be healed? What's the work I need to do? That would be authentic accountability. And I think that it's something that can happen and certainly happens at Common Justice every day on an individual level. And I think those are also steps that we can think about addressing in collective ways as well.
Thank you. I'm actually going to build on that and actually ask you, what role does this kind of accountability, or producing this kind of accountability for our harmed parties, play in their healing equity?
If a harmed party if a harmed party consents to the responsible party coming into our program, and then also chooses, let me back up. So after they come into the program and or one of my colleagues begins working with a harmed party, we work closely with them to determine together whether joining the circle, the restorative justice circle, where the responsible party comes up with agreements in conjunction with other members of the team, for example, the harmed party gets to choose whether they want to be part of that process. And when they choose not to be part of it, it's often a very conscious and clear decision of, this is not safe for me, or this actually wouldn't be healing for me. Like, I want them to be in the program, but I don't, I trust other people to work with them and to come to those decisions together. If the harmed party does want to be in the circle, they have a big voice in what agreements the team comes up with for the responsible party that all comprise the accountability they take, which I think can be really, really powerful for a number of harmed parties. And even if they don't wish to join the circle, I've had harmed parties not want to be in that space, but work with me, for example, ahead of time to come up with some ideas that are important to them. And then I can help represent them along with what we call a surrogate, which is often like an outside participant who has survived a similar kind of violence, but kind of stands in for the specific harmed party in that case. So kind of touching on so many things that have been said, our current criminal legal system doesn't look to the survivor as to what actually would be healing for them and what accountability means. And what we strive to do is actually put that at the center of this process. What does this person need to heal, and how can the responsible party meet them there and know that that is what accountability is going to look like for them?
Thank you. That actually brings me to my next question. One of the many things that you do in your work, is help harmed parties navigate the victims' compensation applications. And one of the petitions that we've launched as an organization is to help remove the requirement to file a police report in order to qualify for victims' compensation in New York State. Can you tell us a little bit about what this process looks like for a harmed party here in New York State, and what are some of the obstacles to getting those compensation funds?
Absolutely. The process is a super complex and grueling one, to be quite honest. There are many stipulations that would make a harmed party eligible or not eligible. One of the big ones is that in order to be eligible for compensation, it's a little complicated right now because of the pandemic, but largely you have to make a police report and you have to continue to cooperate with law enforcement throughout the duration of the case. So that's a big obstacle often for people. Another requirement that I find particularly frustrating is that unless you're legally a child or over 65, you must have sustained physical injuries to be eligible at all. And I've had clients who have survived violent robberies just be like out of luck. And it also discounts the significance of emotional injury from surviving violence, right? And I think the whole system honestly needs to be rebuilt and kind of rethought through, but there are just many requirements that, I think can be taken issue with and kind of built one piece at a time so it can shift things for a whole lot of people.
RJ, can you tell us of a time where an RP may have become an RP, sorry, is an abbreviation of our term responsible party. HP is the abbreviation of a harmed party. So RJ, can you tell us of a time when a responsible party became a harmed party, either during their time with us in the program or immediately after? And what did that look like?
Sure. And I recently circled back to talk with this person and, consider what to share here. This was someone who's a responsible party participant, somebody that I was working with, Black Panamanian man who, in the course of his time with us, was at a public gathering where he was shot in the foot. It wasn't targeted at him, it was incidental. He didn't even know where it came from. He just realized at some moment that his foot was in a lot of pain, that he was bleeding. And, as a result of this, he went to the hospital. He was uninsured at the time and out of status. And he ended up with thousands of dollars in medical debt. And, and obviously with a bullet in his foot, and he worked in construction, which also meant that he couldn't work for a very long time. So he's out of work with a lot of debt. And, in the early days of that, we talked about, because we have a whole victim services trauma support wing of our organization, talked about him getting support from our trauma support team to seek victim services that could hopefully it could support some of the things he was facing. And, through the course of those conversations, more came out. It was revealed that he had actually been interrogated by the police while he was at the hospital getting treatment on his foot. And that, the thought of having to go back to a police precinct and, kind of re-engage the police in order to get a report with which he could then file for VOCA funds seemed a bridge too far. Because he didn't have any information about the case when he was interrogated in the hospital, he was treated as if he was being non-cooperative. And mind you, he had also just been shot. So he was in a great deal of pain and shock. So even just kind of, those multiple experiences, led him to the conclusion that it might not be in his best interest to actually move through the steps that are required to get victim services. And this is someone that, is incredibly skilled in his trade. I think above and beyond, and it's unfortunate that we have to go here, but sometimes some of us need to hear it this way, beyond just his inherent worth as a human and his, and deserving support in that moment. This is also somebody who's highly skilled in his trade. And, that was also just a very clear loss to us society-wide, that this person who could also contribute in that way was taken out, right? Had sort of, lost his ability to contribute. And in that lost, his ability to support himself and to support his loved ones. And all of that is a far greater cost to our society than simply creating a structure that would have provided easily accessible and efficient forms of healthcare and victim services.
Thank you. So what was his reason for not reporting the incident, and what you already spoke a little bit about the impact of not receiving that compensation. But yeah, what were some of the reasons for his for not wanting to interact with police?
Yeah, there were multiple. I mean, most immediately was his treatment by the police immediately following the incident. But additionally was his precarious status in the country that, just made him feel like it might not be safe to approach the police and have this kind of conversation. And those were the two main deterrents. Had he not had to go through the door of the precinct to get to the door that says victim services, I think the outcome could have been very different.
So this is a question for all three of you, and feel free to answer it however you like. But what makes the common justice model work as a solution to violence, as opposed to our current criminal legal system? And I'll start off with you, Anna.
Yeah, for me, part of what makes it work is that it's work that is rooted in community and in coalition with lots of different organizations that have like a similar vision. So one of the things that I want to emphasize is that the work that we do is not just what Em and RJ have been describing. It's also about like highlighting people who are also coming up with solutions to violence, because ultimately what we're all doing is, creating the space to put these solutions into place.
Thank you. Em, what makes common justice a model that you support, and what seems to work about our solution to violence, as opposed to the traditional criminal legal system?
Yeah. I think the aim and the kind of like ever producing result of our carceral system and culture is isolation. And isolation begets so much. And I'm just kind of thinking about all of everything that RJ shared about shame, for example. When I think about what the opposite of that isolation and that shame is its presence, its relationship. And in our model, I think common justice strives to put relationship at the heart of the work, and trust that it produces something else, and it produces the power to transform people's lives and create something new.
Thank you. RJ?
I really like what you shared, Anna, and definitely the piece I've been driving home. I think this piece that is accountability and healing, rather than punishment and denial, is what makes it work. And I've been here long enough to see the transformative power of those things. And then I would also say something else that I really appreciate about common justice and the way we're working is that we're both involved in immediate direct service. I consider our one-on-one work with responsible parties, I work with harm parties, as direct service. It's crisis response. It's working with people who are in very desperate situations and meeting their needs and building those relationships immediately. And then at the same time that we have a communications team, right, that's doing work around public discourse, and that we have an emerging, organizing and policy team that's looking to change some of the systems and the structures that lead people into crisis, right, or that lead people into situations where they don't actually have the right sort of ladders to pull themselves out of crisis. And that's something else that I appreciate about our model.
All right, I'm going to go to the Q&A section because we have a question for you in there, RJ. I don't know if you could see it. It's from Arnie Fishman. He asks, RJ, can you describe any examples of how you work with responsible parties to address shame?
Thanks, Arnie. I don't see the question, but I'm happy to answer it. Just, kind of echoing some of what Em was also naming about this piece around shame and isolation, and that it's part of what made the work so difficult during the pandemic, and doing things over the phone or over Zoom, is that actually that piece around presence and being together, and for a responsible party being able to just say out loud what they did, what the circumstances were around that incident, how they felt at the time, how they feel now, to say all of these things out loud, to be witnessed, and to be witnessed non-judgmentally, is a huge piece of breaking shame, right? Shame is, if there was one word that shame could say out loud, it would yell hide, right? Shame would just scream hide. And by creating those sorts of encounters, and also by creating cohort groups with participants, who can provide sort of mutual support and process these things, those are the kinds of contexts where you can really kind of make shame shrink. Because what we do want to leverage is, we do want to leverage authentic feelings of guilt, right? I have done something wrong, I want to make right. It's very difficult to leverage feelings of shame, which are essentially a narrative saying, not I've done something wrong, but I am wrong, or I am bad. And from that place, it's very hard to move. And so that's why we want to find spaces that quiet those voices, so that the other voices that can allow for motion, that can allow for action, that can allow for change, can be louder.
Amazing, thank you. I don't see, we just got one from Chuck Lederman. Chuck says, I have been deeply impressed by the work ideology of common justice, and from my past viewing of some of Danielle Surratt's descriptions of the program. I heard that the program was not working with sexual abuse survivors through this kind of process. I work with sexual offenders and wonder if there are some survivors who would want to be involved in this kind of process. I certainly know of some offenders who are able to directly participate in this process. What is the program's current policies around this? RJ, would you like to answer that question?
I can start, and then RJ, please jump in on whatever I miss. So we don't work with sexual violence or family violence, including IPV, for example, because of the innate power dynamics in that kind of violence. The way that our program is set up, and specifically the circle is set up, we feel is not rooted in how to address those power dynamics to keep everyone safe, and to really create healing in those situations. So it's sort of a matter of it's sort of beyond what we do. Like, our program is really tailored to what we do work with, which are some violent felonies. And that is, I think we all generally agree that, like, it would be possible to create a program addressing those harms, and our program is not what has been built to do that.
Thanks, Em. Yeah, to be clear, the kinds of cases that come to us are attempted murder cases, assault 1, assault 2, rob 1, rob 2, right? Armed robberies, violent robberies, similarly with burglaries. So, right, these are serious violent felony crimes that are not inherently sexual in nature. And like Em said, this is our lane. This is kind of what we've chosen to carve out. More sirens, I don't know if you can hear them. And I think each of us in our work, should get clear about those things, and what is the piece of this big thing that we're going to hold, and what are the pieces that other folks are going to hold. because of the nature of these, of the things that bring people to us, it's also a big reason why we've ended up being a post-plea program. Because in order for, municipalities such as Brooklyn and the Bronx to trust us, that plea is a big part of putting something in place that creates enough trust for then us to be able to work with someone without them being incarcerated, continuing to be in the community. And personally, I would love, not in a like, yay, this is really fun kind of way, but in a, wow, this feels really important and meaningful kind of way. I would love to be doing work around some of the things that you named in terms of sexual violence. And it's a lot of what brought me into this work, and it's a lot of what I've done outside of Common Justice. And I would say that there are a lot of staff at Common Justice who have done other work that relates to gender-based violence or IPV or sexual violence. So it's something that a lot of us as staff and as individuals have other experience in and interest in, but it's also just not the thing that we do here for all the reasons I'm named.
We just got a question in the chat from Lisa Brody, 2 questions. Common Justice works with Brooklyn and the Bronx DA offices, right? How will Common Justice be able to expand into other boroughs, other cities, to be replicated in other places? How do you get the public to buy into the restorative justice when politicians get voted in promising to be tough on crime? And that's a question open for anyone on the panel.
I think that's above our pay grade, Lisa Brody. We are tough on crime. This is what actually being tough looks like. And I think that's the argument we need to make. That if you're actually serious about addressing violence, like if you actually care about ending violence in society, that our program and many other programs that are not us and do other things are the way to go and are actually serious about addressing violence.
Just to add to what RJ was saying, I think the solution is not so much like how do we get common justice into other places as much as how do we leverage the experience of what we're doing and use that to connect with other people who are doing similar work, but it has to be adapted in different ways. Again, the issues that we're facing are not, you just can't like erase them. You have to develop these solutions for it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, I can't help thinking about, because it's at the top of my mind, and I'm sure it's at the top of many people's minds here. And I'm going to pose this as a question, right? A rhetorical question. What would the Rittenhouse trial have looked like? How would Kyle Rittenhouse's experience been different going through the Common Justice program versus the trial that we all saw recently? Who would he have had to answer to, and what would that process look like? And that's a question for you both, RJ and M.
Softball questions over here.
As I think we talked about earlier, our program centers the needs and wishes of the survivor. And so in this particular case, the one survivor of his violence and then the families of the 2 people who he murdered would have a say in what they hope happens in terms of how accountability can happen and how that reckoning can happen for him.
Yeah, I think just to go back to your question, Lisa, I second everything that RJ said. I don't think we are, I think we are tough on crime, and I think we are tougher on crime than the criminal legal system, in a more equitable way. Right, because we don't punish people for being poor or not being able to post bail. We don't punish, we seek accountability, right? When someone has been harmed. And that's different than having to owe a debt to society, which is dependent on whether you can actually afford your freedom or not. So I would argue that restorative justice is tough on crime. I think it's a matter of, and I don't think that it's implemented in as many places as it could be, because of the fact that there is a financial element tied to our prisons and jails, right? There are people profiting off of that. And I think those are the people the politicians are listening to more than the survivors, unfortunately. And if there are no other questions from the audience for anyone else on the panel, I'm going to close this webinar. And thank you all for being here. If you have the time to check out our most recent petition, if you haven't signed already, this is to remove the barrier, the requirement to file a police report in order to access victims' compensation in New York State. That would really make victims' compensation accessible to everyone. I dropped the petition in the chat here. And if you are part of an organization that would like to sign on and sponsor this bill, you can figure out how to do that through that link there. Or you can email our director of policy at jprasad@commonjustice.org. That's our director of policy, Jessica Prasad. She's amazing. This is our very first bill that we're trying to pass into law. And it's very important, and it's very core to the work that we do here at Common Justice, so that survivors, the link, I'll post the link here again. That's to sign the petition for the bill. And if you can, if you have the means to donate to our Roots of Resilience campaign, all of the funds for this campaign will go to our harmed parties who, for reasons like this bill that we're trying to pass, for some reason or another, are not able to access victims' compensation, or it's just simply not enough or doesn't suit their needs. We can provide direct material support for them. And that's with our Roots of Resilience campaign that we are currently launching. And as always, keep in touch with us on social media. If you have any questions about our work, you can always email us at info@commonjustice.org. And yeah, if there are no further questions, I'll let RJ, M, and Anna thank you all and say their final piece.
Thank you all so much for being here. And I can't emphasize enough how much, how long away that any kind of donations towards our campaign go for our harmed parties. As I spoke about earlier, during the pandemic and just ongoing, the material support has been completely life-sustaining, life-changing. It allows our work to be what it is. And so even $5 just goes a very long way. And I am so appreciative of any contributions that you make. And thank you so much for your time and for being here with us.
Yes, thanks everyone. Sign the petition. Please donate to Roots of Resilience. It would mean a lot to us.
I want to thank everybody and thank you for showing up and being part of this combo. And yeah, thank you.
All right, it's almost 4 o'clock, so I'm going to close it all. But thank you all once again for being here and joining us. Like I said, Feel free to email us at info@commonjustice.org if you have any questions about our program, replication, donation, or our petition. Info@commonjustice.org, or you can contact me personally at EQUI. I'm gonna drop my email in the chat as well. EQUI ROZ, I forgot my last name for a second, at commonjustice.org. I don't know how helpful I can be. I'm in the comms department, but I can try to answer any questions you have or send you in the right direction. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great and restful weekend. Thank you so much, RJ, and Anna, for taking the time to be on this panel with me. I really appreciate you three and the work that you guys do all the time here at Common Justice. You're really the backbone of the work that we do here. So I'm very happy to have given you all the platform to speak to the people who are interested in this work. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.